Hello! Are you here? Of course you are, yes! And thank you for tuning in to a brand new episode of the Paul Leslie Hour. We are honored to welcome Bobby Wood, a highly skilled pianist, songwriter, and recording artist. Bobby Wood hails from Mississippi and became known as a member of the Memphis Boys, a group of studio musicians who worked with many great recording artists, including Elvis Presley. Bobby Wood has a long association with the touring and recording artist dynamo Garth Brooks. In fact, Bobby played on every single Garth Brooks album. There's even a book you can get your hands on, Walking Among Giants, From Elvis to Garth, the Bobby Wood story. We want to thank our friend singer-songwriter, artist, and businesswoman Amanda Colleen Williams for helping make this interview with Bobby Wood possible. We'd also like to thank Dickey Lee for his hospitality. Hey, if you enjoy our content, and, well, we hope you do, please subscribe to the Paul Leslie YouTube channel. It ensures that you will never miss any of our exclusive content. And now I think I'm watching the clock. It's time for Bobby Wood. Let's listen together.
Well, Bobby Wood, we're here in Franklin, Tennessee. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary musician Bobby Wood. Thanks for doing this.
I appreciate it.
So you are from Memphis, Tennessee originally.
I'm from New Albany, Mississippi.
Oh, that's right.
Originally. Born on a cotton farm. Grandfather was a music teacher, passed down to his kids, and that's where we started with actually gospel music.
Gospel music.
Yeah, I was 6 years old. They'd stand me on the piano bench and the family, and that was it.
Can you tell me about how those kind of gospel hymns affected you?
Well, it taught me soul, I guess, without realizing it, you know. Because when we would be out in the cotton patch, my dad would hire some of the people from towns, some being black, and to either pick or hoe cotton or whatever we did, and we'd sing our gospel songs and they would sing theirs, and we'd all just join in together on the songs, you know. So it was pretty neat, you know. It's just like, and sometimes we were invited to black churches even back. We're talking the 40s, you know. So it was pretty neat. My dad said we had cotton by trade and music by choice.
What is your earliest musical memory, if you could think back?
I guess it was being a kid, growing up in the Deep South, and with gospel music. My hero was Elvis's hero, Jake Hess, with the Statesman Quartet, you know, and so. We loved to sing, you know, and if you didn't come in to rehearse, you were playing baseball or football or something out in the yard, you would get smacked. Time to rehearse. But anyway, it's like after I got in high school and Jerry Lee Lewis came along, and you know, I was off and gone.
It's occurred to me and many other people that there have been so many people from Mississippi.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
Everyone from Percy Sledge.
Right.
Jimmy Buffett.
I think B.B. King.
B.B. King.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about Mississippi?
I don't know. It's just the Delta. Some of the musicians in Motown were from just right down below Memphis in what they call the Delta.
Right.
And I think it's growing up kind of poor. You know, you had roof over your head and food to eat, and well, I can't remember any bad times, you know, and we went through them. But, you know, when the family was together, I mean, we laughed and cried and the whole thing together, you know. It's 6 kids, and then Mom and Dad. But, yeah, it was a good time. You know, when my dad taught us, he said, we grew up with, you're not better than anybody else, but nobody's better than you. So don't let anybody ever put you down. And that kind of stuck, too, you know. So I was told by a lot of different people that I wouldn't make it in Memphis, or I wouldn't make it in Nashville, or whatever. And the rest is history.
Well, speaking of making it, would you say that the path to becoming a professional musician, was it a difficult thing or more of a pleasure?
It was a pleasure. I mean, when you're a kid, 17, 18 years old, you want to hear yourself on record, you know, on the tape. And back in those days, it was mono. And but you know, later on, I learned if I needed to lay out that was a part of the record too. And I had to learn that by getting embarrassed and peeling off the, you know, kid, you know, I got to be heard, because, you know, what's that? Nothing. And so then I learned to be part of a group of heads which really work together, you know.
What would you say serves a musician, or a songwriter for that matter, more? Would you say it's being confident or having a little bit of humility?
Maybe a little of both.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when, you know, I was a member of the staff band at Sun Records, which was Sam Phillips' studio at the time on Madison. And I became the staff piano player there for several years. Had my own record out that was a hit in spots. You know, everywhere it was a hit. It was eight weeks and #1. You know, and then I had that schooling behind me, and then we had a bad wreck on I almost lost my life when we was on tour, and. But then that kind of, I had no more hits after that. They'd released several records, but it was like local and never, not like the hit that I had. So, you know, it was a thing of, you got to feed your family, you know, and there wasn't enough work to do that. So in 1967, I had been working with Chips off and on, Chips Moman, for a few years, and then he built a studio, and he hired the best musicians in town, which was Reggie Young and Bobby Emmons down at High Records, and then me and Gene Christman and Tommy Cogbill over at Sun Records. And so he just mixed the two bands together, and of course we were all playing on hits without each other being together, you know. But the Nashville people would come down. By this time Memphis was getting really hot, and Nashville people would come down and do their demos, and they'd put the High group with the Sun group, and then that too kind of, you know, Chips saw that right away, you know, and he started hiring everybody to go over to American, and then we didn't realize we worked around the clock at American and producing hit after hit, and we was working so hard in the late nights, I wouldn't even turn on the radio when I would come home from the studio at 4 o'clock in the morning, because I just didn't want to hear any more music by that time. But anyway, we didn't even know what we'd done until we decided to move to Nashville, and somebody started adding up the hits and the different charts that we was in. We was like in 4 different charts, 122 chart records within 4.5 years. So wow. That was pretty cool, and you didn't have time to get any ego or anything, you know. It was just like, we just went to work, and we respected each other, and at the same time, we were in competition with each other, but it was a friendly competition, you know. It's right. And you know, we were like brothers, you know, whether it be black, white, whatever, didn't matter. I remember the first time I worked with Al Jackson was over at Sun Records, and By this time, we did have earphones, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this guy's got it, man! That's all I got to worry about is not getting away." But we just learned to respect each other, and it was like a family.
And respect is such an important thing.
Yeah, it is.
You know, I would like to get kind of an idea. I've always been fascinated by recording studios. The first time you went into a bona fide recording studio, was that an exciting thing? What was the emotional feeling? Scared?
Yeah. When I first moved to Memphis, I barely had enough nickels and dimes together to buy gasoline to get me places. But Sam Fiddler, I had a few years earlier, auditioned for him. And of course, it was a Jerry Lee Lewis type Crazy Arms or something. And he just hurt my feelings really, really bad, And he says, "Bobby Wood," he just stopped me, grabbed my hands, and he said, "I don't need another Jerry Lee. I already got one." And he said, "Now you're going to bring me a Bobby Wood." And my producer told me later, he said, "He told you the truth." He said, "Don't try to be. It's okay to be influenced by somebody, but don't copy him."
Yeah.
So, and he said, especially Sam, I said, he's not going to hire another Elvis. It's like,
right.
He's got one. But, I got to overdub on some of Johnny Cash's tapes that Sam had sitting on the shelf. And Sam was the king of remastering something and have maybe one new song on a package and sell the whole thing again.
Right.
But I remember, like the Cash band was Johnny, the drummer, and bass, and electric guitar. And so they just tuned up with each other. There wasn't any standard tuners in the bunch. So they actually had to tune the tape to the piano to make it sound in tune. And they put wraps around the capsule or what it was, and would it speed the tape up or slow it down, and they got it to where it was doable, and so they rolled the tape. It's back in the days of mono too, so
right,
from one machine to the other. But I did that for Sam early on, and it was part scared, but another part was like, a lot of people wanted me to play Floyd Kramer too,
Right.
So I would do that. But anyway, it's been a long ride.
Well, I've had the chance to listen to some of the recordings that you've made under your own name and some of the instrumental stuff, and it's really interesting. You can hear, a few different influences, but I'm hoping you can tell us who were the pianists that really found a way into your heart, you really enjoyed. Actually,
it was people that were simple.
Yeah.
It was like the New Orleans guy, what's his name, the keyboard player, Alan Toussaint.
Yeah.
Yeah. Simple, just rocking back off on the minor third to the third, and the Fats Domino stuff, and that caught my ear because it was simple, and you played it in what you felt, and you didn't play just to be heard,
Right.
So if somebody says, if it don't fit, don't force it, So that's kind of the theory, And then I brought that on to Nashville with me because it's like we were a member of a production group,
right?
And one day the guitar player would have a fantastic thing on this song. The next day it might be the drummer. It's like it's just when you get those heads together, somebody comes up with something, and most of the time it worked.
Before we started taping, first of all, tell all the people out there where we are. We're in Franklin, Tennessee, but this is the home of the great songwriter Dickey Lee.
Yes.
And you two have known each other for 60?
Back in Memphis. I used to break away from Chips and come over and work with Alan and Dickey and Jack Clement over at the Sun Records, or Phillips, so. Yeah, we became friends, and we actually produced a hit record over there on what was it, Dickey Smoke Green? I think it was. We did a song, I think it was No Not Much, I believe. But anyway, and me and Dickey, Allen, and Knox Phillips.
Yeah.
There was 4 of us.
Yeah.
And we cut them top 10 album.
We were talking before we started filming about some old songs, like you brought up Georgia on My Mind. And I think this is a Sinatra-esque kind of picture behind us, this painting that people see. And I'm just curious, what does a Bobby Wood kind of guy, what do you think about those really old songs, what they call now the American Songbook?
I think what reaches the soul, which usually is in the mind, but the heart as well. You know? Yeah. And in your spirit, which is more in the middle of you, I think that touches something. You know, whether you cry, whether you laugh, or whatever senses that you touch. And Sam Phillips said this. He said you need to touch people's senses somewhere, touch, feel, whatever. You know, and so if you're not doing any of that, you know, he said that goes across the whole board. You know, R&B, country, those songs are very similar. You know, they're heartache and heartbreak most of the time, and so it has to touch you someplace. And me being a gospel singer, I guess I love melody. Yeah. You know, anything like Last Date, when it came out, just an instrumental, I said, it hit me right here, you know. It's like, I went out and bought the album, which I never bought albums, you know. It's like, man. But, and then after that, you know, I can hear the melody thing weaving on, like Dusty Springfield album that we did, and things that we did later on. We didn't have time to listen at the time, but later on, I said, man, that sounds pretty good, you know.
I should have thought of this before, but can you hand me that water? My throat started getting a little dry. I appreciate it, sir. All right. Thank you kindly. I like what you were saying there. It made me think about a couple days ago, I was listening to some old recordings of Hank Williams. Of course, they're all old, but I was thinking how much in common. You know, this is the centenary year, 100 years since his birth. I was thinking how much a lot of those songs had in common with those old songs from the Great American Songbook. How much they had in common with, like, Bing Crosby kind of stuff, just in a country genre. Yeah, it's like we was talking earlier about when Haggard came here, he didn't want the Nashville sound. Yeah. And so he would hire some of the Memphis Boys, which had just moved here. And, you know, we weren't Nashville sound. We had country records, hit records, but we wasn't trying to cut a country record, you know. And it was just a moment of the little 4-piece band or whatever that then the soul came through. You know, it's like, That's the Way Love Goes was just, you know, I told somebody one day, I said, when you're in position to receive, usually something good happens. So the intro, I was dubbed as a doing the intro of songs and endings, and with a da 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 da, and it just came out of nowhere, you know. So anyway, and that goes on and on and on. So I just really feel like I told some of the guys here one day. I said, I don't care what it is, it ought to have soul. Yeah. It ought to have soul. You need to be able to feel it, you know. And so, anyway, that's my story, and I'm not sticking to it. Well, soul, you know, makes me think of Elvis Presley and so many other singers. But being that you're from Mississippi, was there an extra sense of awe when you were around Elvis Presley, or was there a sense of awe?
There was more of a brotherhood.
Brotherhood.
That happened, and I deemed it later, I think it was Mississippi. Yeah. And we had the same heroes. Jake Hess was one of his heroes out of the Statesman's Quartet. And if he was in town during a concert, he would be backstage at Statesman and Blackwood Brothers concerts not an auditorium, whatever it was, Coliseum, I guess, in Memphis.
Right.
But, you know, we both like to kid around and play jokes on each other and stuff like that. And we just kind of got a brotherhood. He actually offered me his ring one night. We were sitting in the studio real late, and he had this ring on that had emeralds and diamonds and all kind of stuff in it. It must have cost $80,000 back then, you know. And I commented on the ring, and we were sitting in the control room, just listening to playback. And I said, "That's a nice looking ring you got, Elvis." And so he just pulled it off and handed it to me, and I looked at it and had his name inside of it, and then I handed it back to him, and he said, "No, that's yours." And I said, "Man, I don't want to take your ring." I said, "It's way too big for me anyway." I said, "Here, I'm just trying to help you get a hit record, you know." He had been out of the charts for 8 years, so we had writers and different people there that Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto and all those. And but it didn't take him 30 minutes to join in with the production.
Yeah.
And let's try this, or let's try this, you know. And of course, you know, he found out right quick he had some willing hands that would try it, you know. It's like, wow. And so Marty Lacker said that their first drive back to Graceland at sunup one morning, he was in the back seat, and he said, he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "I think this is going to be good." And Marty said, "I think it is too." And the fans even deemed the American Back to the Sun records. They said it put them in more. And I said, "Well, it's got to be soul. It's got to be, you know, because Elvis got back into the soul of it. It wasn't just a formatted thing that sounded the same every record you played, you know." So
yeah.
It was all painting a picture and not repainting one either. It's like one of our guys said one time, we'd been trying all day to record a Beatles song and it just wasn't happening. He just said, "Boys, the Mona Lisa has been done. Let's leave it, don't need to be touched up." So that was true.
How would you describe Elvis Presley when you got behind the image, the man himself?
He was just kind of a down-to-earth person. I mean, we were able to just kid around, and he usually wouldn't come in till midnight. And by this time, you know, I'd had a wreck back in '64, and I'd start rubbing my right eye, you know, which I'd lost in the car wreck. And so I'd put the patch on. And he asked one of his guys, why was I wearing a patch? And of course, they told him it was about the wreck. And so he started calling me Wiley Post. And I said, "Wiley Post?" He said, "That's Will Rogers' pilot." So he would look at me and say, "Hey, Wiley, you got the plane warmed up. It's time to go." And I said, "She's warmed up. Let's go." We just, you know, it was like a brotherhood type thing. I wish I would have had time to go out to his house and spend some time, but we were working around the clock, and I didn't want to hear no more music. If I listened to anything, it would be classical.
Yeah.
You know? I said, just, no, tired. Yeah, our total time, I think, with him and the band was something like 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah. I want to say January, February, somewhere in there. And then I think he came back in later on and did some overdubbing of his vocals, you know. And I actually had to do one of his vocals that he called at the last minute, and he couldn't talk. He had laryngitis or something. And he wanted to know later how we found the right key. And I told him, I said, well, I asked Chips to play back 2 or 3 of the things that we'd cut. And I found his range compared to my range, and I don't know if it was a step higher or a step lower. So that's all we had to go on. So I put it in a key that I thought that would be his key. And when he got to the studio, it was perfect. He said, "Wow." But anyway, it's like we just became real good friends. I think the the record label and different people had started a war between Elvis and Chips, you know, and which should have never happened. But anyway, it's like I wish he would have come back, you know. But the powers that be back then, it just wasn't going to happen. So we both went our own ways.
You have been working in recording studios for, I mean, decades now, and working under all different types of producers, working with different artists. Would you say that there's been someone who taught you the most about the recording process?
I mostly had to learn on my own. By this, you know, early in, I came over full time to American in late '67 because they had already cut "Son of a Preacher Man" and another song, and I came over right in the beginning almost of Dusty Springfield album, and so I, you know, in working together with these same guys, I mean, you just start learning some things. I know that Atlantic used to come down. Well, Tom Dowd taught me some things that he said that you should have in mind when you're playing. He said that if you have too many notes in the middle, he said it's going to get swimmy and nobody's going to be detectable. And we used to call that the clubby sound, like clubs, that, you know, everybody would get right in the middle range and start playing. And he said, either jump up an octave or down an octave, you know, to where, you know, whatever you play, you know, where it's not going to cover up somebody else, you know. And those are things that I learned, and then somebody pointed it out to me after I'd moved here, you know. I said, well, I guess it goes all the way back to American Studio, you know, what I learned at that point. And there was times that I would just get up from the piano and go into the control room, and I said, unless you got something for me to play, I don't hear anything, you know. And it's, okay, sit down and help us produce, you know. So that's the way it went, you know. Because I wasn't afraid to, I felt like me laying out was the best gift I could give to somebody at that point, you know. So that traveled for 60 years too. So.
Well, I want to talk about your songwriting a bit. Would you say that songwriting is something that you've had to work at, or is it something more of an innate art? I
had to learn.
Yeah.
It was a craft, and I had to learn, again, what not to do, and learn my strength, because I booked some writing, because in Nashville, it was like a team writing thing, usually 2 people, or maybe 3, and sometimes you would write with the artist, and so I learned my strength was melody again, you know, and somebody else's strength would be lyrics. So I learned to book myself with lyricists rather than, so I could have the melody thing all by myself in the groove, and then let them chime in with the lyrics, you know. And so that worked out good. And I learned, I always admired writers because, you know, it's like, if you got a good song, you got nothing, you know. It's like, I always admired writers. And then when I moved to Nashville, me and Johnny Christopher, he had written several, Always on My Mind, and several hits even in Memphis, you know. And we moved over to Nashville early in March, I think it was, in Tommy Cogbill. And so we just, me and Johnny got together late after sessions or whatever, and I think my first number 1 was a Crash Craddock song called Still Thinking About You. He'd already done Rub It In, you know. And so we had his next single that's walking along, singing a song, I feel good, you treat me fine all the time, still thinking about you. And so again, it was groove versus lyrics, you know, so. And that was my first number 1.
First number 1?
Yeah.
A lot of times when somebody writes a book, they will say that they learn something about themselves, or they start to look at something about their life in a different way. So when you wrote your book, Walking Among Giants, by Bobby Wood and Barbara Wood Lowry, was there anything that you kind of learned about yourself, or was a revelation to you?
Yeah. And she worked at Federal Express, and she did, I forget what department she worked in. I think it was hiring or something like that, and she was teaching from that area. So she had to write up manuals and stuff at FedEx, you know. So she went on the computer and did the searching of my background and my grandparents and all that, and put all of that together. And after doing research on things, like I said, the 122 songs, we didn't know what we had done until we moved here, and somebody back in Memphis started adding up the songs, you know, that we had done, and we said, wow, you know, thank the Lord. It's like, it's a blessing. And it follows throughout R&B, country, rock and roll, whatever, you know. And so it's, I said, I couldn't have planned that, you know, being hired on Merle Haggard album, George Jones album. It's like I started working with Billy Sherrill, 74, I think it was, and I got to come in. I do know that Pig was sick or double booked or something, because Sherrill always used him as a keyboard player. Well, on that album, he wasn't there, you know, so he called his guy that headed up the sessions, and Billy Sanford. And he said, well, these Memphis guys are in town, you know. And so he said, well, hire him. And so it was me. And I stayed for the next 15 years of George Jones and whatever Sherrill did, you know. And I didn't deem myself to be a Pig Robbins at all, because I admired this guy. And so it just, you know, I guess I must have had something soulful or something that Sherrill picked up on, you know. Because I remember I don't know if it's Jones or who it was doing one of the songs, and I did this diminished walk down. And when the record came out, Sherrill had put strings on that line that I had played on I think it was Fender Rhodes piano. And I said, whoa, thank you very much. And it just things like that kept on going for years, you know. And I think the COVID got most of us.
Yeah. What makes a good song a good song?
Well, there's good and there's great. You know, a good song can be good, but again, I think it was one of the songwriters here. We recorded a song and it just wasn't coming off, and we stopped and went and to a restaurant and had a meal, you know. And we came back to the studio first, the band did, and Chips. And so somebody finally came up with a little funky beat on this song, you know, that would have never been cut like that anywhere else, you know. And the writer come back and he says, my gosh. He said, I would have never, ever thought of doing that song in that bag, you know, or doing it that way. And I said, well, that's the way it goes, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just admiring songwriters and what they did, and, you know, Hank Williams and the whole scheme of things. It's like you respect all of them.
Yeah.
You know? I moved to Nashville in the outlaw days, and I hated the outlaw songs because there was not much of a melody, and it was mostly all lyrics. And I said, I ain't got anywhere to get on this, you know, just sitting here taking up time, you know. But, you know, I'd do a few things every once in a while on it, but it just wasn't anything that I could hold on to. But it's just a thing that didn't hit my soul, you know. It's just, you know, why don't you hire somebody else, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, we quickly passed through that right away. So I was happy about that. But no, it's just, it's different eras. There's different things that come up, so.
I'm hoping you can tell us about what it was like to make all, you have appeared on all of the Garth Brooks records with the exception of the Chris Gaines thing. I had the great pleasure to interview Alan Reynolds. There's not many Alan Reynolds interviews out there, but what was the dynamic like of the singer, Garth Brooks, and this producer, Alan Reynolds, one of the most successful record producers ever?
I think it was a plus that he came through the Memphis school too. Like there's no college you can go to learn when to back off. And Alan actually said one day, he said, producer is really the wrong word for what we do, because a producer is somebody that tells everybody what to do. And he said, that's what you don't do. But he said, it should be a director. If everybody is going in kind of not a good direction, the director is to come in and point us in another direction. And most of the time, they were right, So I think he learned that same school that we went through, and to try our best not to hit on anything else that anybody had painted, do your own painting. And so, it just comes from, you got to be there at the right time and jump in and jump out, it's like, but it comes to the place to where I get to do this and I get to do that, it's like, man, I can't believe it. I said, there's got to be a God, because he has definitely blessed me.
How would you describe Alan Reynolds?
First of all, he's a friend, and I think we were at the point of our lives. There's 4 years that I went crazy on drugs. And Alan, I think, was one of the people that kind of steered me in another direction, him and Buddy Killen. And, I didn't know where first base was when I'd get strung out on something, and some of my close friends said, hey, Bobby, this is interfering with your talent and your work and your blessing and everything else. I said, you're right. Thank you. And one thing down deep I didn't ever want to lose was my soul, and being able to be gifted enough, I guess, to what has happened. And but you still. Somebody asked me one time, somebody that was at a session, and this guy came over and wanted to interview me for a little bit. And so, what was it like working with this person here? What does it do to you? And I said, first of all, they just caught me off guard. I said, well, I give 150% of whoever it is, if it's Joe Nobody. Yeah. And it don't have to be a person like this. But I can also tell you this: once you've worked with Elvis, I said, everything else is just okay.
Oh, that's good.
I put him down in a good way, but I mean, don't ask me a stupid question, you're going to get a stupid answer. Huh. But first of all, we don't allow managers in the studio. This is why. Yeah. We're busy.
Right. There's a song you have a co-writing credit. I think it's just a beautiful song, and I'm talking about In Another's Eyes.
Okay.
What do you think of that song?
I had a hard time for a while figuring out what the lyrics were saying, because only Garth knew, what was going on. I was more in tune to the soul and, again, of the melody. And of course he chimes in on those too. It's like he has a thing that when he wants to keep going up, and like I'd find the right chords for him to sing the melody that he's singing, and it's been neat working with him, because he hears things that nobody else hears, and it's kind of it comes kind of from the same place. You know, I told him one day, I said, there was a songwriter in New York or someplace that he once said he's sitting at his piano at 9 o'clock in the morning waiting to receive. And he said, I felt like if I wasn't there waiting, somebody then maybe down the street is going to receive. And he said, I want to make sure it comes to me. But I said, that's so true. You put yourself in, I told Garth, I said, you put yourself in position to receive. And I said, out comes the intro to Sweet Caroline, or the intro to The Dance, or In the Ghetto, or whatever, And I said, there it goes, here it comes. So you just jump in there and say, again, thank you for putting me here, But I think being humble is the right thing to do, and treating everybody with respect, because everybody has their own area that they're blessed in, and I just say, well, go for it, So, and that's the way I taught my kids. I said, there's nothing wrong with swimming upstream, especially when your gut tells you your crowd is going the wrong way. I said, don't be afraid to say no, And they're both my boys. Although they're not in music, they could play a radio. That's about it. But anyway, they found their niche. My oldest son started flying airplanes when he was 14 years old, and my youngest son, it took him a little longer. He did a little bit of everything out west. Rode PRCA rodeo bareback for about 10 years. And I think he finally found out that he was going to get old in a hurry.
Yeah.
But he finally found the fire department, and so now he's a paramedic in the fire department out in Colorado. So. And he told his wife, too, he said, guess what I get to do today? She said, shut up. I get to go to work.
We were just talking about Garth Brooks, but there have been some great singers, and I've got a list here of people who have recorded something that you wrote or co-wrote. So there'd be Matt Monroe, great British singer, Dusty Springfield, Melba Montgomery, Crystal Gale, Ronnie Millsap.
It's 12 o'clock.
Has there been a singer who especially knocked you out with something that they did with one of your songs?
I think most everybody, because they Talking in Your Sleep was, I think it was the first big one. And again, we did it exactly like I did. I did a demo on that song. I sang it, and actually we got somebody down in Atlanta or Macon or someplace, some record label, heard the song and paid Roger $5,000 to have the song to cut on their artist. But I don't know, nothing happened with that, so we ended up paying for the demo. The demo started with me and the piano, and so when I got through with the song, Roger keyed the talk back and he said, Bobby Wood, we've got a hit on our hands here. He said, let's hire a band. We hired a band to come in and play with my track. And then we hired 16 strings to come in and do the strings. And so that was the most thing that I think that Crystal, nailed it too. She nailed the artist thing. And yeah, there's been others too, like Garth, and then in others' eyes, it's like again, Alan Reynolds showed up too, I believe, and said that, if you got to feel whatever you're doing, it's got to be real, or you shouldn't be doing it. So I think that captures the whole thing in any song that anybody does. So there's those that different genres that just jumps out. So
yeah.
Ooh. Thank you.
To what or to who do you owe your talent?
The Lord.
Yeah.
Like I said, I met him early on in the gospel music. I grew up in high school of 200 kids, and it's still 200 kids today. They don't do that stuff before the first grade. You go right into the first grade down there, and you learn your ABCs and reading and writing and all that stuff, And it was simple. Nobody had anything. We're all farmers, and it was, of course, we were in church every Sunday and every Wednesday, and somebody asked me what sign was I born under, and I said under a pew of a church. But it just came naturally, and we found out that he does answer prayers. That's for sure.
Well, there's all these different titles we could give you, that you're a studio musician, a pianist, you've been a recording artist. I mentioned the instrumental recordings that I enjoyed. How would you define Bobby Wood? Who is the man at heart?
I think, again, just blessed. I didn't know this until probably I got to Nashville. No, it was Memphis, I guess. And my mom told me one day, she said, when you were born, your grandfather, who is definitely not a prophet, I don't even remember him ever going to church. But I said, my mom said, he prophesied over you. And he said, my mom's name was Uni, and he called her Yoon. He says, Yoon, she said, you were laying on his lap, and he said, I don't know what this one's going to be, whether he's an evangelist or what he's going to be, but he said, I do believe that the world is going to know his name. Huh. And I said, whoa, folks, prophesy over your kids, okay? So, according to Scripture, he blessed me that day, It's like, man. And so it's just I've been racing to keep up, running to keep up. But no, I got to thank God, because I don't deem myself to be that great of a keyboard player. There's people that play me under the rug, and I'm in admiration of them too, and I appreciate their talent.
Well, my last question, I always like to end. It is the most open-ended question you could have. There's always people watching or listening from, all across the country, and even places like England. I just give you the floor. To anyone who tuned in with us, what would you say to them?
Find your direction. Find where you're supposed to be, just like the man sitting at the piano. And, it may not be that. You may be a fireman. It may be this or it may be that. But find what you feel right is for you in your stomach, and watch what happens. I said, his divine calling is really up to all of us, to whether we get in the right place to receive or whether we don't. And too bad this day and time we're living in is people don't. They go in they think it's new, and it's not new. 5,000 years ago, they were doing the same thing.
Right.
It's like, and I just think that it's like my two sons. Find what you enjoy, and what you're going to feel it inside. Hey, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And after my wreck, in Memphis, I look back on that and I said, I didn't need to be on the road. I just didn't need to be. And we found no more hits at the time, and I was cutting a bunch of junk. But then I became, again, a staff piano player at Sun, and I enjoyed that niche. I enjoyed creating. And I didn't realize it so much until we went out with the Highwaymen after we recorded their first album. And after about the first few shows with those four guys on stage would make you'd want to cry, It was like, wow, and all the fans that they had out there. And somebody asked me one day about 6 months into it, I said, you know, while I appreciate all of that, I said, that is not my niche at all, man. I said, you can just play Always on My Mind intro so many times, and after a while, I don't want to play this anymore. It's been done. Yeah. And I said, you know, nothing against anything. I said, it's just like I found where I'm happy and where I need to be in creating. And I love painting pictures, you know, and well, I do it musically. And so, you know, find your calling, you know, and you're going to be glad you did.
Well, Bobby Wood, thanks so much for being with me. Thanks for sharing all these stories and insights with us. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
God bless you.
God bless you.
You know, the Paul Leslie Hour is made possible by people like you, listeners, viewers. Please go to thepaulleslie.com/support, and you'll know what to do when you're there. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who contributes. Performance of The Entertainer intro song by John Primorano. And of course, this is your announcer speaking. See you next time on the Paul Leslie Hour.